78 Sports TV here. Welcome to the Lions Den. Special debate for you today. Sam Langford versus Jack Johnson. Legacy debate, okay? Andrew Sr., newcomer to the Lions Den, will be representing Sam Langford. Veteran J-DILL will be representing Jack Johnson, okay? Both guys will give opening statements. Let's start with Andrew Sr. Let's try to keep it under a minute. Give your opening statement, what you intend to prove today.
Okay, 78, thank you. Well, what I intend to prove today is that Sam Langford's career is far deeper than Jack Johnson's, and also that coming from lightweight as he did and being 5'7", the accomplishments that he achieved in his career easily outweigh Jack Johnson, even though Jack Johnson was a great fighter and a great technician. I'll use a quote actually from Jack Johnson. He actually called Langford the toughest little son of a bitch that ever climbed in a boxing ring. So that's what I intend to prove, that Langford's career is so much deeper, so much richer than Jack Johnson's.
Okay. Let's go to J-DILL. J-DILL, open the statement.
Okay, I'm intending to prove that Jack Johnson had the better legacy, how he overcame the politics, had the more memorable fights, and I'm going to prove why Jack Johnson will say guys like Joe Jeanette was just a better fighter than Langford, even though that's the best fighter he ever fought, according to him. But he just said Sam Langford was just the most dangerous fighter he ever fought. And that's all I got to say.
Okay. So first round goes to Andrew Sr. State your case.
Okay, well, I'll start at the beginning. I want to focus, first of all, on the first 10 years of the career to highlight the activity aspect of the legacy. Johnson, over the first 10 years of his career, only had 63 fights. In fact, in his first 5 years, he had very few fights compared to fighters of that day. Now, over the same 10 years, Langford had 127 fights, winning 92 of them. Johnson had won 46 of his 63. But the important thing I'm wanting to highlight here is the competition fought over that time. Jack Johnson, for the first 5 years, his most notable fights were 3 fights with Klondike Haynes, which were a winner, loss, and a draw. He did fight some decent fighters like Frank Childs, George Gardner, who were champions. But Sam Langford started at the races. Within a year, he'd fought and beat the legendary Joe Gans. The year after that, he fought to a draw with the great Barbados demon Joe Walcott. And he'd already started to fight Jeanette, Blackburn, David Holly, all these other skilled fighters. Over that time as well, he'd already started to move up the weights. Now, one interesting thing about that is Sam Langford would never put on weight to fight. He would often fight men in much bigger weights, but wouldn't put weight on and then lose it like fighters do now. If he weighed 140 pounds, he'd just fight a light heavyweight at 140 pounds, which to me just heightens his legacy, because he was not afraid to fight much bigger men, even with the size advantage, the weight advantage. And, that's one thing. Now, over that first 10-year period, he fought 26 fights against Hall of Famer. It's like a who's who. Blackburn, Walcott, Gans, Ketchell, McVeigh, many fights with McVeigh, many fights with Jeanette, 2 knockout wins over Dixie Kid. Jack Johnson only fought 12 fights against Hall of Famers in that time. Much less active, much less opposition. Over that time as well, Johnson held the coloured world heavyweight title. He had 10 fights for that, making 9 defences. He wasn't beaten, it must be added. But also in that time as well, Langford was much more active. He had his first reign during that time as coloured heavyweight champion, making 9 defences. He'd also captured the world 158-pound middleweight title, the 158-pound coloured title. So he'd already started picking up various titles. I just want to say that I accept the coloured belts, and I will be highlighting them because I don't feel like these great fighters from the past should be hindered by the establishment of the time, which is a subject I'm sure we'll get onto. But overall, over that 10 years, Langford, much busier, fighting much more often, much more consistently, and more importantly, against more consistent opposition. Now, the interesting thing about that is the first 10 year of Johnson's career takes him to 1907. Now, from 1908 until end of his career, not counting the later exhibitions, he only had something like 32 fights. Yes, he had a run as world heavyweight champion in that time, made a number of defences, but Langford in that time had another 189 fights with 118 wins. He completely fought another 37 fights against Hall of Famers, you know, knocking many out. Of course, he scored knockout wins over Joe Jeanette, whereas Jack Johnson didn't. So even as a smaller man moving up, sometimes he'd only weigh 156 pounds, 160 pounds, and he'd be fighting men at 190, 200 pounds. And being only 5'7" and such a small man, to me, that just amplifies what he did, that he could fight these big men. He was a ferocious puncher. You know, as Harry Wills once said, after he'd knocked out Harry Wills in the 19th round, just to give you a bit of information on Langford's power, Harry Wills said that when Sam hit you in body, your first instinct, Harry Wills said, was to turn around and you imagined that his arm had be coming through back of you. He were a ferocious body puncher. And also, he said, when he hit you in the head, you actually had to be brought back to life before you knew what had happened. Harry Wills, the Black Panther, great fighter, actually said that when Langford knocked him out, he actually thought he'd been killed. He didn't realise he was still alive until they actually brought him round. So, you know, that's just another thing there. But over those 20 years, just much more active, fighting from weights, from lightweight to heavyweight, fighting every great fighter you can imagine. I mean, combining all of the fights and looking at all his fights, Johnson had something like 95 fights. Langford fought like 110 fights against what I'd consider cream opposition. 64 fights against Hall of Famers, another 30-odd fights against tough contenders or good fighters of the time. And that's also borne out as well in the number of fights they had against champions, because this is a statistic many people don't have on the old fighters. But through Johnson's entire career, he only fought 29 men who either was or became champions. Langford's is 68. He fought 68 fights against men who held world titles. Now, the weakness in that, some of them are multiple fights, McVeigh, Jeanette, Wills, etc. But even then, that shows that he was willing to fight such a high level of competition consistently, year on year on year. In 1912, one example I'll give you, he actually fought 4 fights against Sam McVeigh in 1 year. Plus, there were other fights around that. He had more tough fights the year after, more tough fights the year before. But that sums up his career. Unlike Johnson, who took like 5 years to get going before he was fighting the Jeanettes of the world and fought Langford 1906, etc., up until 1908, Langford went straight in at the deep end, fought multiple great fighters. He beat the legendary King Joe Gans, well, by ringside observers, they view he'd been robbed against Walcott. He'd dominated large parts of the fight, even though Walcott came on strong at the end. He held wins over Blackburn, Holly, Jeanette, McVeigh. You know, just much more active, fighting much higher level of consistent opposition, fighting more men who'd held titles, fighting many more Hall of Famers, you know, just on and on, constantly for his whole career. The only weakness in Langford's career is his last 30 or so fights. He picked up a lot of losses there. He started to go blind in one after Fred Fulton stoppage loss, you know, so he picked up losses there. But looking at his whole career compared to Johnson's, Johnson's career is fantastic. He's a great fighter, a really skilled technical fighter, and a very strong fighter. But Langford was greater in my mind because he fought as a small man. To give you some idea, he was pretty much the height of Roberto Duran. And yet, as one writer attested to him, he had the skills of a prime James Toney with more experience, but he had the punch power of Mike Tyson. And that incredible boxing skill he had, combined with the power, enabled him to fight, you know, heavyweights when he was at middleweight, enabled him to fight light heavyweights when he was at lightweight or welterweight. And that, to me, is something that really singles him out over Jack Johnson. The level of opposition over multiple weights, fighting often much bigger men, and being able to knock out bigger men, like being able to knock out Joe Jeanette, being able to knock out Harry Wills. You know, Harry Wills was 7 inches taller than him, outweighed him by 40 to 50 pounds. You know, just an incredible feat to even be able to fight such a skilled fighter as Harry Wills. And, you know, on and on and on through his whole career. If I can, there are a few stories as well I'd like to put in, because a lot of people don't realise that Langford was actually he was a very jovial chap. He also, there's some fantastic stories I'd just like to get out about him that will flesh a bit more information on him. As we know, Jack Dempsey wrote in his autobiography that he would not fight Langford. He was scared of him. Now, during that time, Langford was attributed by many great boxing writers at the time as the greatest fighter they'd ever seen, greatest fighter who'd ever stepped in a ring. You know, this is one little tale about him. Before one fight, Langford was walking around the edge of the ring, and he started addressing the crowd purely on his own. And he said, "Oh, sorry guys, I hope you don't mind if I make this a short fight, but I've got a train to catch." And then what happened is the fight started. Langford knocked him out in about 90 seconds and then quickly said, "Oh, sorry, everyone," and got out of the ring and shot off. And he actually managed to catch his train. So he wasn't only a vicious puncher and a great skilled fighter, he was also a bit of a character. He also had some charisma about him. There's another one where he was fighting Jack Thompson, a fighter at the time, and he hadn't been allowed to throw heavy punches at Jack Thompson for the first 6 rounds. And at the start of the 7th, he came out and Langford put his gloves out to touch gloves, and Jack Thompson said, "What are you doing, Sam? It ain't the last round." And he said, "It is for you, son." And then he knocked him clean out with first punch he threw in that round. He knocked him out in about 10 seconds of the round. So, you know, these are just little stories that overall added to his incredibly deep career. He fought many of the opponents Johnson fought. He knocked out Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, who got a draw with Johnson. He beat Klondike Haynes, who won, drew, and lost with Johnson. He, of course, had a win over Ketchel, who Johnson beat. So even though they fought many at the same fighters, Jeanette McVeigh, Langford held his own. And that is my main argument for him. He had over 50 fights for the coloured title, heavyweight title, 5 reigns, 35 defences. He won the Mexican heavyweight title. He won the Australian heavyweight title. He actually pursued Jack Johnson to England and then to France. Now, this is what Jack Johnson said to a promoter who was trying to set the fight up. This is in 1909. This is what Johnson remarked. He said, "I don't want to fight that little smoke. He can beat anyone in the world. He's got a good chance of beating anyone in the world." And he actually said, and I don't like to say this, but it's what Johnson said. In fact, no, I'm not saying it. I refuse. My morality won't allow me to say it. But yeah, fireman Jim Flynn as well. You know, he, of course, beat Dempsey. He said he'd fought Johnson and Dempsey, and he said Langford hit way harder. In fact, he said when Langford hit you with a clean shot, it was like being hit by a baseball bat. And really the point from all this I'm trying to get across is that we're talking about a very small man who learned his trade and within a year would beat one of the greatest lightweights of all time. And from then on, just carried on year. Some years having 16 to 20 fights. Some years having 4 fights with Harry Wills, 4 fights with McVeigh. Just on and on and on. 5 reigns for coloured title, as I've said, all the defences. And that is why I feel that Sam Langford has a greater legacy than Jack Johnson. Even though I will fully concede Jack Johnson was a cleverer man business-wise. And how to play the game. But I think Langford is greater because he was a small man, he fought much bigger men, and was able to gain the same kind of results or better results against bigger men than what Johnson did. And I'll leave my opening argument there and hand over to J-DILL.
Okay, good opening round. Goes to you, J-DILL. Represent Jack Johnson.
All right. Tom Brady will never break the records of Peyton Manning, but he has more world titles than Peyton Manning. And that's why he will go down as, in history, a better legacy than Peyton Manning. Same thing with Bill Russell over Wilt Chamberlain. Now let's get to boxing. Young Stripling, who has more knockouts than Sam Langford, fought at least 8 Hall of Famers. Beat 6 of them. Also had a 6-4 record against them. Went from bantamweight to heavyweight and fought them. Never won a world title. Died at age 28. He's forgotten history. Why? Because he never won a world title. And back in those days, boxing history, winning the heavyweight title was the 3rd best thing in America. Second to being the president of the United States and being a military guy. It was the empire of masculinity. Guys like Thomas Molyneux, who got screwed against Thomas Cribbs in England for the world heavyweight title with that 30 count, should have been the first black heavyweight champion. Then came John L. Sullivan. He should have fought Peter Jackson, but it never happened. So, why is it that Jack Johnson has the better legacy over Sam Langford? Langford assumes the uncrowned champion legacy. He won many fights, had many battles, but did not take many risks in the boxing industry. The color line at face value stuck among fighting other black fighters numerous motherfucking times. Jack Johnson was crowned champion because of not only the risks he took in boxing, but going against white fighters, his social influence and sportsmanship inspired generations of black boxers such as Sugar Ray Robinson, Muhammad Ali, and guys like even Floyd Mayweather to this day. And now, I will say this. Should Johnson gave black fighters, a chance here and there, like guys like Wills and McVeigh? Possibly, but then them guys around those times were separating themselves in fights because they keep on beating up one another. Even Langford, of all people. Now, let me get to the point about my argument with Langford. Okay? He fought to me the same guys. And I'm going to go down this list. Okay? Now follow me, fellas. Sam Langford's career was defined with too many rematches with fighters such as Luther Manuel, 3 times, 2 draws, and a win, and that fighter had a losing fucking record. Never won a world title like Sam Langford. Andy Watson, with a losing record, fights 1 no contest, 4 draws, that's 5 fights. Never won a world title, just like Sam Langford. Stonewall Allen, 2 fights, 1 draw, 1 victory, that's 4 fights. Never won a world title, just like Sam Langford. Joe Louis' fucking trainer, Jack Blackburn, who Johnson never liked anyways. 3 draws, 1 win, and a no contest, that's 5 fights. Dave Holly, 1 loss, 1 win, 2 draws, 4 fights. George Compton, 9-winning record, 2 wins, 2 fights. Larry Temple, 3 wins, 1 loss, 4 fights. Jim Berry, 7 wins, 2 draws, that's 9 fights. Young Peter Jackson, 6 fights against that guy. 1 loss, and that was from getting knocked the fuck out. And then Langford just won 4 wins and had a draw with him. Joe Jeanette, 2 losses, 7 wins, 4 draws, 13 fights, and Jeanette knocked out Sam Langford as well. Sandy Ferguson, 2 wins. Klondike Haynes, who Jack Johnson was 1-1-1 against. Sam Langford was 2-0. Fireman Jim Flynn, 5 wins, 1 loss, and a draw. Okay, Dixie Kid, 2 wins. Sam McVeigh, 6 victories, 2 losses, 4 draws. That's 12 fights in accumulation. Al Kubiak, 2 wins. Tim Sullivan, from debut to last fight, all draws, and those were 3 fights. Eddie Tremblay, 1 win, 1 loss. Multiple fights with Bearcat Wright, who also knocked Langford out. Langford had 2 victories against him, a couple draws, and a loss. And then he had 2 wins against Ruskell Hall. Then Harry Wills, who owned Langford, and so did Jeff Clark. But check this out. Harry Wills is a Hall of Famer who never won a world title. And he got hosed by Dempsey because Jack Dempsey decided to fight Jim fucking Tunney. Check this out. According to BoxRec, Harry Wills has 13 wins, 2 losses, and 1 draw against Sam Langford. He knocked him out twice. And Jeff Clark had multiple fights with Sam Langford. Now, after all what I just said, that in total is 48% of Sam Langford's career, and that's 122 fights in accumulation of the same opponents multiple times. Now, who are the guys that knocked out Langford? Harry Wills, twice, that nobody ever brings up over Langford. Freddie Fulton, who was also a tall guy, and had Langford to death, just like Wills. Fucked him up. Quentin Johnson, Joe Jeanette, and Johnson had a losing record, by the way, folks. Young Peter Jackson, who should have fucked up John L. Sullivan, knocked out Sam Langford in the beginning of their career for fighting one another. Brad Simmons, the last guy that fought Langford, knocked Langford the fuck out. Bearcat Wright, who knocked Johnson and Langford out, so I guess they got that in common. Tut Jackson, knocked out Sam Langford. And who the fuck is Tut Jackson? A lot of these guys I just mentioned are non-world title winners. Now, Jack Johnson is a world title winner, folks. He rises above the politics because racism was performed and constructed as a social influence on black fighters back those days. Now, Jack Johnson, what's it happen at? He's his own fucking man. And so Jack Johnson got sick of that dark meat, who were chickens. He just wanted to start fighting some white meat that was some chickens. Because you want to know what? The chickens pay the bills. The white chickens, I might say. Now, Jack Johnson has more memorable social influence fights than Sam Langford ever did. And if you don't believe me, the fight with Jeffries, 30,000 people show up to the area. That was only able to accommodate 18,000 back in those days. The tickets were sold between $10 to $50. And Jeffries gets knocked down just 3 times in the 15th round. The fighters were paid well from the event. Johnson got $110,600 from that, $50,000 and $60,000 for the shares. Jeffries got $90,400. $50,000 for the movie rights and $40,000 for his share. Where in the fuck could a black fighter ever get away with that type of murder back in those days? Especially in boxing, where the heavyweight championship ranked your masculinity and your status in the whole wide world. And that ass whooping was so bad that even Teddy Roosevelt wanted that disclosed. Now, Jack Johnson beat the living shit out of Sam Langford. Knocked him down 3 times. And had an easy win in that victory for 15 rounds. Problem was, some people speculate this and that, but eventually Langford admitted that he really did lose and get knocked down by Johnson. Now, the problem is, they didn't fight a couple more times, but the point is, if Jack Johnson whooped that ass, and his eyes are on the prize to fuck up the motherfuckers that put him, Langford, and Wills in that oppression. Come on, man. Come on. He should have done that Great White Hope shit. He should beat the living shit out of them and laugh at their fucking asses. He should carry a motherfucker to the ring and to his fucking corner and just be like, this is all y'all got? And then he should board the fuck out of them white motherfuckers and still whoop that ass. He'd be like, I paid $10. Yeah, I don't give a fuck. I just took your $10. That's some legendary shit, man. He sticked it to the man. See, Sam Langford played it so fucking safe. He was what you call one of them safe Negroes. He's willing to take, I don't want to fight Sam because he hits so hard and he's just a tough guy and, oh, God, I can't just imagine me fighting him. Well, don't you think Johnson got the same treatment? Johnson hound that ass just like Ali hound Liston, Ali hound fucking Foreman, and he hound fucking Frazier. He wasn't going to take no for a fucking answer. And that's what the fuck you got to do. Johnson did that to Burns for so much that even Hugh McIntosh, an Australian promoter, said, you know what, fuck this. I want to see this black man fight you, Burns. I'm willing to put $50,000 on the line for this. That was the highest paid fight of his time in those days. And a black man set that up. I ask you, what was Larry Holmes' biggest fight up to this day? It was against a white guy with that Great White Hope bullshit. It was a big business. And Jack Johnson, like my counterpart said, was a better businessman. This is called prize fighting. You got to get that money. And Johnson was making $50 to $60 to almost $100,000 a fight around those times when he became champion, that it got to a point, if you calculate that of today's era, that's $3 million to $1.9 million per fight. Don't you think you're going to get well fed? Don't you think you're going to take less punishment compared to a guy like Langford, who's getting paid $5,000 or $1,000 per fight, where he got to fight 3 times a week and shit per month? Eventually he gets blind. Come on, dog. You tell me who had the better legacy. And that's all I got to say.
Okay. All right. That was J-DILL's opening round. Now we move to the open forum, where you guys can communicate with each other and ask each other questions. Go ahead, set it off, you guys.
Okay, I got a question. All right.
That was quick. Okay, J-DILL, go ahead.
Andrew.
Yep.
Now, you called me out in this debate, okay? I get that. I just wonder, what was your biggest motive of bringing up Sam Langford into a debate in general?
My biggest motive was to spread information about Langford, because I feel like the legacy he left, despite the times he fought in, he did leave a good legacy in boxing. And I think that what I wanted to do was spread information about Langford. That's why I chose Langford. I think he's a great fighter. He's known amongst boxing, but I think a lot of boxing fans, especially younger boxing fans, may not know much about him. So I picked Langford specifically so I could try and spread as much information about Langford as I can.
Okay, one more. Well, I got another question. It ain't one more question. My other question to you is, what was Sam Langford's social impact into boxing?
Sam Langford didn't have, I concede the point, he didn't have the social impact that Jack Johnson had. Sam Langford's impact into boxing was more within boxing. He was not really a high liver as Jack Johnson was. He didn't get involved with the public life that Jack Johnson did. Even though he had charisma of his own, he handled his career a different way. The lack of not getting that title shot, he was kind of just content to do his career, make as much money as he can, feed his family, and do the best he could, based around those horrible times with the establishment as it was.
Now, let me ask you another question.
Can I ask a few after that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go ahead, mate. Yeah.
Now, deep down inside, as a man, could you admit to yourself, knowing that they all went through the same shit, that Jack Johnson made a more impact in boxing as far as paving the way for other fighters more so than Sam Langford?
I will say on the social aspect, yes. I will fully concede that Jack Johnson had a more impact in boxing due to the controversy he brought, the public profile he had, and things of that nature. But my counter-argument is that Langford left a bigger legacy in the ring. Now, those things some obviously combine. But my argument's always been that Johnson had a better social aspect. He made more money. He had a great career. But Langford had a greater career in the ring.
Let me ask you this. Do you think Langford would have took as many fights as he did if he was getting paid back in those days $50,000 to $100,000 per fight?
Oh, of course not. No, of course not. I don't think any fighter would... I don't think any fighter would fight Harry Wills 5 times in 1 year, unless they really had to.
High risk, high reward, right there, but not 5 times, right?
But you see, if I could counter you now with a few questions of my own, because during your personal statement, you mentioned the repeat fights amassing for so many of Langford's fights, but you neglected to mention Jack Johnson. He had 7 fights with Jeanette, 3 fights with Klondike Keynes, 3 fights with McVeigh. Hello? 3 fights with Ant Griffin, 2 fights with Jim Flynn, 3 fights with Jim McCormick, 4 fights with Sandy Ferguson, 4 fights with Black Bill. So he really pretty much accounted for 40
Actually, with Keynes, I said he was 1-1-1, while Langford was 2-0. The recording will show that.
Oh yeah. No, I'm not on about. I'm on about the number of fights he had against the same opponents.
Yeah.
Jack Johnson did exactly the same thing. Now he had a much shorter career. He had about 95 fights. Langford had 310. So it's not as apparent when you look at Johnson's career, but he did the same as well. Those 9 opponents account for over 30 of his fights. So he did the same, but obviously having a shorter career, he didn't have quite as many fights. And obviously when he won the title, he was making more money. He didn't have to fight as much, but he also did the repeat fight as well. But because his career is much smaller than Langford's in scale, it's less highlighted. You are, sorry? Yeah, obviously he's other problems he had. But the other question I'd like to ask you is about, the fights, because you mentioned that, Langford fought many people who didn't hold titles because obviously of the establishment and their Emperor Palpatine rule at the time and all the horrible things that happened. But I wanted to ask you, could you actually tell us who Jack Johnson fought who did hold titles and what titles they held?
Okay, Stanley Ketchel, we all know middleweight. He also fought Tommy Burns, who held a title, Marvin Hart, who had a title, who beat Jack Johnson according to newspapers.
Do you know what those titles were? What they held?
Marvin Hart eventually won the vacated title against Tommy Burns, if I'm not correct. Or the vacated title of Jeff Jeffries, if I'm correct.
Yeah, Marvin Hart did hold the heavyweight title. Yeah, he actually beat Jack Johnson as well, didn't he, on points over 2? Yeah, because this is another thing that I was getting at with my point. Jack Johnson, even though he got the title and he did fantastic to get a shot at that time, he had to, as we all know, pursue Tommy Burns everywhere and berate him in public and insult him, and he got his shot. All credit to him for that. Maybe, like you said, Langford could have done that step. Maybe he could have, pushed that extra mile, even though he did chase Johnson quite ferociously, and Johnson wouldn't fight him again.
Okay, my question to you is, what fights to this day that Langford had that resonates into the history books other than Joe Jeanette, the Jim Barry's fights? Because in the article it said Jim Barry was so sickly and so pale and ill to be up in there that the crowd was not engaged in that fight until Sam Langford knocked him the fuck out. And other than them Joe Jeanette battles, the McVeigh battles were not as appealing as Joe Jeanette versus McVeigh with that 27-round fight, getting knocked down 26 times, 27 times, or whatever. But what fight had the audience and the world into Sam Langford like Jack Johnson was against guys like Burns, Ketchel, Jeffries?
Well, as I said in my earlier point, like I said, Jack Johnson had a bigger profile in boxing due to the lifestyle he lived and the title he had. But my point was that Langford left a bigger legacy within boxing as a fighter in the ring. Now, the main criticism I have of Jack Johnson is he was too inactive for the first 5 years of his career. Langford beat the great Joe Gans in his after about 14 months as a professional. Jack Johnson has no win on that level in that time scale. He did fight Klondike Haynes, won, lost, drawn. He was knocked out by Choinsky. He lose to Hank Griffin as well on points over 20 rounds? So he didn't make the impact in boxing that Langford did. Langford goes more unknown than Johnson because of Johnson's heavyweight title, the establishment heavyweight title that he held. But to me, that doesn't mean that Langford's legacy is any less profound. And even if, someone could say, well, he fought Joe Jeanette, all these times. But, to fight a tough, hard fighter like Joe Jeanette, who Jack Johnson called the hardest man he'd ever fought in a boxing ring, to fight a man like that so many times, I don't think can be underrated. Because Joe Jeanette was a ferociously strong fighter and a very skilled fighter after those first few years. Because Jack Johnson fought Joe Jeanette all 7 times in Joe Jeanette's first 2 years as a professional, when Joe Jeanette was relatively inexperienced. He'd entered boxing on a dare. He'd actually fought a boxing fight and thought, you know what, I'll give it a go, I might make more money.
Well,
And he
Jeanette
went in.
knocked Sam Langford out in, his sixth fight.
Oh yeah, he did. I mean, Johnson's first fight with Jeanette was Jeanette one loss, no wins, one loss, no draws. And after that first 2 year period, Jack Johnson never fought Joe Jeanette again. Langford continued to fight Joe Jeanette as Joe Jeanette gained more experience in ring, mastered his craft, became a much more dangerous fighter. And actually, another interesting story, Joe Jeanette based his style off his idol at the time, who was actually Sam Langford. He based his whole style of moving, punching, fighting on the inside because he admired Langford so much that he tried to base his own style on Sam Langford. So that kind of shows you what impact Langford had on people around the sport, even though he didn't achieve the greater things, outside the sport socially, or maybe made as much money or had as big a impact on the record books. As a boxer and as a fighter, I think his legacy far outshadows Jack Johnson. Because the point I was making... Oh, go on, sorry.
I mean, beating Fitzsimmons is also a victory in itself, even though I can't stand Fitzsimmons with his races, but, I mean...
Yeah, second round knockout, wasn't it?
Yeah, Fitzsimmons won the middleweight title against the Jack Dempsey. I didn't know in the Lions Den on that debate.
Untitled Jack Dempsey, yeah.
I mean, he also had exhibitions against Jack Johnson's true trainer, Joe Chorninsky. And also, Fitzsimmons had some good wins, per se. And he has a good legacy. And people were following him pretty well, other than Corbett and Jeffries and Sullivan of his time. Problem was, he was a weak-ass fighter to me. But, he's in the Hall of Fame. Just like other white fighters. Like, I don't consider the O'Brien guy that good, even though his accomplishments say one thing. And now, my problem is this with Sam Langford, okay? Now, even though Johnson whooped his butt the only time they fought, and Langford had 51 fights to Johnson's 34 at the time. Langford only lost 4 fights to Johnson's 5, I think. And my thing was, when Johnson was hot, even though negotiations or oral negotiations or speculation saying you promised me this, promised me that, crap. My problem was, why were you joining the Jim Jeffries train, you and Joe Jeanette? Why? Our jealousy, our sour grapes. I mean, the guys that talk shit about you and would never give you a title shot, and you're joining their train, you're trying to teach them some secrets, how to beat Jack Johnson? Really? That is sickening to me about Sam Langford. And he always played the safe role, the safe Negro role. It was like, no, Sam, I don't want no problems with you. You'll never get shot with me. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. That makes me really feel good about myself. But then, what I don't get about Langford is he said in a quote, even though it's speculated, but it's still up there, he felt like he could never beat Jim Jeffries. That was odd to me. But here he could beat guys like Wills and Jeanette and all these guys, but you can't say it. I found that odd, and when Jack Johnson did it, I was just like, what in the fuck is Sam Langford bodying himself for? Doing that shit. So, Sam Langford, was a weird cat at times, but at the same time, I don't think he pushed the envelope enough like Jack Johnson and took enough dares or twist and turn and force the issue. And it's just kind of funny, after all that charisma you said he had, and after all that entertaining style he had, because Johnson's style was boring to a lot of people, even before he got in the game as a heavyweight champion. They preferred Langford and McVeigh's style. But the thing I don't get is, if he got all these things going for himself, why is it not like guys like Hugh McIntosh and others willing to put up money for him to fight white heavyweights or for him to fight Jack Johnson? Oh, because Jack Johnson needs to lose the title to the Great White Hope, whomever it is, and they finally used that bullshit Mann Act on Johnson, and then Johnson had to go to exile, and Johnson got homesick, and he was supposed to have a fight with Langford. I don't know what happened after that. We call it speculation, but the point is, Jack Johnson must agree to some terms, fought Willard, was winning the fight, and then he got knocked down and looked suspicious where he got his fucking gloves around his eyes because the sun is so hot in Cuba that he must have made immunity to take the dive against a less experienced, less skilled Jess Willard, a guy that Dempsey destroyed like it was nothing. A guy that Dempsey, and this is the same Jack Dempsey that lost to fireman Jimmy Flynn, who is the only guy that knocked out Jack Dempsey, who Langford beat a couple times. So
yeah, he beat him 5 times. And
Jack Dempsey never wanted to fight Sam Langford, but
no,
Langford never pushed the envelope like Harry Wills did, who owned Sam Langford, and they're serious. And
but there's something that must be realised about that. Sam Langford had already virtually gone blind in one eye and was starting to lose sight of his other. The last 7 or 8 fights of that series against Wills, Sam Langford was already half blind fighting one of the best heavyweights of the time.
Was it because of the Freddie Fulton fight with the jabs and shit?
Freddie Fulton was a furious puncher. In fact, a lot of people said if it wouldn't have been for Wills, Langford, Johnson, he would have been rated the best fighter at that time, even above Dempsey. But I must get this point in as well, because Jack Johnson, when he spoke to the promoter in 1909, when Langford chased Johnson to England and then chased him to Paris, and Johnson actually said the comment about, I'm not going to fight, I don't want to fight that little smoke, talking about Langford. Johnson actually made a comment, apparently a quote, to the promoter saying, "I'm the first black champion and I aim to be the last." Now, everything what you've said, I agree with. I treat all people as humans. I cannot stand that time, and I cannot stand what these great fighters had to go through. It disgusts me as a human being. But at the same time, I must also pull Jack Johnson, because Langford may not have pushed the envelope. But what you've got to realise is, in a time like that, it's like in other rough times in history, some people are willing to push that, and that shows great character. Other people are scared to take that step because they don't know what the ramifications will be. I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but, at the end of the day, Johnson also could have maybe helped. If he would have fought Langford in Australia or Paris, where the fight would have been allowed, he could have made a statement and said, "No, I will fight one of my fellow fighters. I will fight, Jeanette or Langford. And I don't care what the establishment say. I've thrown everything else in the face. I'll throw this in the face as well." And he could have tried to make that statement and given one of these great fighters a shot, but he didn't. He actually said there was no money in fighting Langford. But the problem was, when he first fought Langford in 1906, Langford was at middleweight. He only weighed 156 pounds.
But that Johnson don't matter. That don't matter. Langford was beating other big guys in smaller frame.
Yeah, that's true. But by the later time, 1909, Langford had swelled up and he was much more powerful, and Johnson just wouldn't fight him. Just like Dempsey wouldn't fight him, just like many other fighters wouldn't fight him. And the difference is that Johnson fought people like Fitzsimmons. He fought, Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, who you mentioned. His first title was 154-pound middleweight title. He also won 158-pound middleweight title. He won 170-pound. So he came from smaller weights. Tommy Burns came from smaller weights. Stanley Ketchel started out at welterweight. The difference is that Johnson was beating up smaller men. The difference with Langford, he was beating up bigger men. And to me, that again says, well, if you've got this big heavyweight, Johnson for the time, 6 foot and 1/2 inch.
Couldn't that be genetics naturally? And boxing was a parody of what his diet was back in the days. Like the natural diet for a man, the natural height for a man might have been like 5'6", 5'7", and the average weight could have been like 145 to 160 pounds for men. And then nowadays, because of the evolution and the dieting, the natural weight for a guy is probably like 180 to 200 or 210, and the natural height is probably like 5'9" to 5'11". I mean, you gotta also consider that too. That Jack for his height.
But also, maybe Langford was just a great fighter who, even though he was small, he had the skills and power.
Just like guys like Young Stripling and Harry Greb and stuff. But the point is, like them, he never won a world title. Now, I think he got holes against Walcott. He should have gotten that title against the Barbarian.
He should have done, yeah. He should have done, yeah. And also, before the Joe Gans fight, it was originally going to be a world lightweight title fight, but Langford came in 2 pounds overweight, to say. There was some issue around that, but it ended up being a non-title fight. Otherwise, it would be in lightweight. But I must say, sorry, I really must get this in, because the thing I don't like about that time is what these fighters had to go through, okay? Langford and Johnson and Jeanette and all these great fighters, Blackburn, Gans, all of them, you know, they had to fight in this system where, you know, a fighter would be told they can't attack your opponent for 6 rounds and you can only attack him for the last 2. They'd be told, well, if you want a contract to fight another guy and get this money, you'll have to take it easy and maybe look bad, you know, and then we'll let you fight this guy. You know, I think Langford, Johnson, I think they all did the best they could in the time. Maybe there's a difference in how they handled that. But I think leaving a legacy like that, like these 2 fighters did, in that time is incredible enough, considering the circumstances. But I feel Langford just left a bigger legacy.
Okay,
lightweight to heavyweight.
Now I'm going to interject, and I will say this. My problem also with Langford is when he had opportunity to fight Johnson, he preferred to fight Stanley Ketchel for the world middleweight title, which was a dumbass move, and eventually something happened to Ketchel after the 6 rounds him and Langford had, and Langford got holes from the promise that he had with even Ketchel. So either way, Langford for some reason had bad business moves. Time in, time out. And then the other problem I have is that no matter what you say about Langford with these fighters and what he left in the ring, Jack Johnson, out of the color division and the heavyweight division of his era, was more considered the man than Sam Langford and others. Now, there might have been fighters that people felt like could have been better suited for the title, but Jack Johnson got there first, and he wasn't going to relinquish to nobody. So what the enemy did was they made up some bullshit law over some women and made Jack Johnson either go to jail or go to exile some other country that will accept his ass. They tried to strip that title from him, but thanks to Paris and the bodying sanction, they weren't going to strip it from Johnson. And the weakest guy they chose Johnson to fight for, a black guy out there, was Ballin Jim Johnson, who Langford beat 9 times. But the point is, if a white guy is going to allow a black man fight another black man for the heavyweight title, it got to be one of the weakest ones, because they still want a white guy to beat the black guy for the heavyweight title, so white masculinity could rise once again over black masculinity. And you know it deep down inside, I know it. That's the deal. And that's all we got to say, because 78 said we had 10 minutes left. So you go with the closing arguments. I'll go with mine.
Yeah, my closing argument is that I do pronounce Langford as a world champion. He was a 5-time world champion for the world coloured heavyweight title. I will not take that away from him. I think these fighters fought in a time that was hard enough for them then to have their titles deprived. Jack Johnson could have fought for the coloured title after losing to Willard. He could have fought Wills. He could also have done a lot, but at the end of the day, he did not fight from lightweight to heavyweight. He fought from middleweight to heavyweight, because actually his first title was Texas State middleweight title. He actually went from middleweight to heavyweight, but didn't stay at middleweight long. He moved up very quickly. But fighting Hall of Famers in multiple weight divisions, consistently fighting much bigger men, rather than Johnson, who consistently fought a lot of men much smaller than him, who came from welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight. To me, in itself, that is unmatched. He cannot match a smaller man the size of Roberto Duran, going up to heavyweight and being able to fight heavyweights, and not only getting a win over him in one fight, which I say he did win, Johnson did win, but he would not fight him again after that, and it was plain and simple. And, you know, even the arguments about, well, you know, Johnson got the title and he did this and that. Yeah, but Johnson could also have fought for, you know, his fellow fighters at that time by giving one of them a shot, but he chose not to. He chose the money route. He chose to flaunt the establishment and set up these big fights, you know, while other fighters were grinding on, adding great Hall of Fame fights to the records. You know, Langford's complete career dwarfs Johnson. 60-odd fights against Hall of Famers, all the title fights he had, over 50, nearly 70 fights against champions, you know, over 300 fights, 120. They just cannot be compared in my book. Jack Johnson is a great fighter, a fantastic fighter, but the depth of legacy is all on Langford in the boxing ring. To me, the only advantage Jack Johnson has is in the more controversial aspect, the money-making aspect. Yes, he had a great career. He won the coloured heavyweight title, made defences, won the established title. But Langford's consistent fighting overrules him in my book. And there's my closing argument.
Okay, my closing argument is this. Jack Johnson rose over the politics, over bullshit that John L. Sullivan, Corbett, and Jeffrey set up in line, where no color fighter could ever get a shot over white supremacy in an empire of masculinity in America. But Jack Johnson, for some reason, rose over the politics after, you know, having a reign 5 years in the color division, and he beat a lot of the guys that, you know, Sam Langford had memorable fights against, like McVeigh and Jeanette. Now, my point is this. Jack Johnson not only became the world champion, guys that Thomas Molyneux, and guys like Peter Jackson and George Godfrey and others never had a chance to do, but Jack Johnson cemented history. The world heavyweight title was the third most important thing in that era. And to claim it means you had influence. And to get it, that means you would get money. And if you get money, you'll take on lesser fights per month and per year. And you're more entitled for exhibitions and stuff like that. That's what guys like Joe Louis did, even though it was over the war and stuff like that. Another thing, you know, the more money you make and the more money that you come through with, the less you're going to want to fight tough guys for low rewards. Now, some people say, well, that's ducking, but if you fought the motherfucker already and you beat his ass, and you know the white guy who try to put you down like he's doing your brothers, you want to whoop their ass for your brothers more so, and get paid more than they can get, and get more shares than they can get. That's really sticking to it. That's really showing power. That's really being your own man. That's really saying, I'm the boss. That's Black History on Black History Month. I don't give a fuck about you knocking these many guys out. That's because you had to. You making $1,000, $500 here, maybe $40 here to scrap up so you can get a house, you know, get a gift for your woman and all that other shit. But the point is, Jack Johnson made history, and he did it in a well fashion. And when you look in the film of his fights, he did it. And he beat Sam Langford when they were both in their prime, and Langford had more fights than Jack Johnson did. And then when they got through fighting one another, they had the same amount of losses. And then Langford gets knocked out by Peter Jackson the next fight. But the point is, Sam Langford is to not be forgotten. Just like young Strickland should not be forgotten, Harry Greb should not be forgotten. But you know why people remember Ezra Charles more so than Sam Langford? Because like Langford, he was beating middleweights like Charlie Burley, Lloyd Marshall, and they was beating light heavyweights like Archie Moore and Joey Maxim, but they were never for a fucking title. But what got him over, and remember in history, is he went and fought the second world Black heavyweight champion of the world, Joe Louis, and beat him, and that cemented his legacy. That's how powerful the world heavyweight championship is. Rising above the bullshit, the politics, and everything else. And that's all I gotta say.
All right. Good debate, guys. Good debate. A lot of good information out there. The people in the comment section will decide who do you think won this debate. Was it Andrew Sr. representing Sam Langford, or was it J-DILL representing Jack Johnson? You decide. 78 Sports TV, the Lions Den will holler.
Allah.